Thank you for joining us this morning. Our topic is on lightening the load with Azure as a secondary data center. Azure is Microsoft's cloud solution. You might be familiar with some of their other ones like Office 365. Azure is their broader base cloud solution and data center solution. And so today we're going to talk about where we're seeing Azure leveraged by clients, and particularly in the data center space, whether it's secondary or in some cases primary. Okay, from an agenda perspective, the pizza will make sense shortly.
I think I'm hungry already, just looking at it.
But we're going to talk about pizza as a service, which is an analogy that we did not come up with. We're not that original, but we did steal it from the internet. So we'll talk through what that means and our attempt to connect what I think is an easily understood model to the cloud model and how we see technology trends playing out. So we'll talk through what that means. Then we're going to get into the ingredients of it, which is really the different elements of Azure. We're going to be kind of quick with that because it is so broad and can be very confusing, and is not the main focus of today's presentation, is really digging into the nitty-gritty of what's in Azure. But Bruce will do some demoing there and have a little bit of a view of the pricing calculator so you understand what these things mean in dollars and cents. Then we'll talk about some of the most popular pies, which is going to give Bruce some time to whiteboard for us. But some of the more common scenarios that we're seeing people leverage in Azure. And then finally, we'll talk about what comes next. So what does the pizza as a service model mean? So like I mentioned, we kind of saw this out. I've seen this in a couple of presentations before, and to me, I think the model really connected and makes sense for people who are newer to the cloud or even have maybe even been in something like Office 365, but don't necessarily understand what's called a shared responsibility model for who's managing the technology underneath and who's responsible for the data and all that good stuff. So we draw this out as a pizza as a service model. So if you're hungry for some pizza, you have the option of, say, making something from scratch at home. You have the popular option of the take and bake. Maybe you go to Papa Murphy's. Maybe you like Jules' take and bake options.
Costco,
I do Aldi.
Sure.
Of course, you have pizza delivery where they're bringing everything to you, and then you have the option of dining out. So I'm going to talk through the different elements here. So if we were to look at made at home, if you're making things at home, you are responsible for every element of that pizza. So from the cheese and the various other toppings, whatever sauce you're putting on there, you're making that. You're making the pizza dough. You're responsible for all the different cooking elements of that. And then finally, you're responsible for serving in your own environment and whatever accompaniments you'll have to that pizza, right? So you are fully responsible for all the different elements here. If we look at the take and bake model,
soda could be replaced with beer.
Yes, soda could be replaced with beer, depending on what night of the week it is and how you're feeling, for sure. So the take and bake model, of course, the nice part is that a lot of the work is already done. Cheese is on there, toppings. You've got a whole pizza there. All you have to do is heat up the oven, cook it, and then, of course, serve, and you're responsible for, again, the other elements of that. But in this case, you do have a vendor who is in this shared responsibility model. So whether it's Jewel or Costco or Aldi, somebody has already taken the responsibility of helping to build a part of this and manage a part of it. Of course, pizza delivery, you can take the cooking elements out, and then you kind of had those final serving elements to go, and then dining out, where everything is covered by this third party. So if you are familiar with cloud language in how we talk about different services and models. Our first model here, the made-at-home pizza, is most similar to, say, an on-prem model, right, where you are operating a server, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in the next slide, but it's more similar to you managing everything in an environment. The infrastructure as a service model is similar to that in that you're still managing a lot of the elements, and I'll talk through what those are, but you've also moved a lot of the basic requirements off to a vendor. Similar to platform as a service, there are things like the application layer that you're responsible for, but even more things are passed off, and then finally the SaaS model.
So to clarify, that's infrastructure as a service, IaaS, platform as a service, PaaS, and software as a service, SaaS. And those are getting to be some pretty common industry terms, and that hopefully helps you highlight what those items are.
Correct. So if you are looking at this in terms of technology, these are kind of how things have been broken out. If you're doing it on-prem, again, you own everything. So the networking, the storage, the servers, those are physical servers we're talking about there. So you've got a virtualization layer that you probably have on top. You're responsible for that Hyper-V or that VMware. Then you have all your guest operating systems, all the way up through applications and the data that's being managed there. In the IaaS model, Bruce talked about infrastructure as a service. This is our take and bake. So from a physical perspective, in the infrastructure as a service model, Microsoft has a data center that has a bunch of servers that I don't really need to know much about. I don't necessarily care about those host servers because Microsoft is responsible for replacing dead hard drives or making sure that they're properly cooled and all that good stuff. They're responsible for the networking between their data centers and connecting to their fiber backend. Yes, power, cooling, all the storage that's out there. So all of that stuff Microsoft is focused on, or the other data center providers are focused on. I care about my guest operating systems that I'm running out there. So still got to make sure that my guests are patched on those OSs. Any applications I'm running are patched. From a configuration perspective, there's still logical networking that I care about. We're going to have virtual networks out there. I still have to manage those, but a lot of stuff is off my plate now. The platform as a service is kind of sits in this fuzzy space between software as a service and infrastructure as a service, but at the end of the day, we've eliminated the operating system from my management, so I no longer, Microsoft is now the one responsible for making sure any OS that my applications are sitting on are patched. I'm not worried about that anymore. I may not be worried about some of the backup elements, although we still have a responsibility to our data, so I might care about those in another fashion, but kind of a full server backup is out the window. It's not something that I need to be concerned about, but some of the other things I will have to manage, like the application itself. And then finally, SaaS, again, Office 365. Most of our customers have already gone down this road. This is where most people start their journey in the cloud is, let's move our Exchange server out to Microsoft. And now I'm not worried about patching Exchange server. Microsoft is doing that. I'm not worried about managing the storage of mailboxes and all of that stuff. I still have lots of configuration things that I need to be focused on. I need to make sure that I'm keeping up with Microsoft's changes. There are still things that we are responsible for, both as customers and if you're leveraging a managed service, and Peters has a number of managed services that would focus around IaaS as well as Office 365. There are things that either a partner or you as a customer are going to have a responsibility to manage, but a great deal of it is off in this scenario. Okay, and with that, we're going to have Bruce going to go into a little bit of demo mode here, though again, the focus of this demo is not to dive really deep into building things. It's to give you a layout of what Azure looks like, and the pricing calculator is going to be a portion of that. So, Bruce, I'm going to invite you to share your screen and go ahead and take it away.
I have done so, and let me know when you can see it. Is that the screen you can see at this point?
Yep.
All right, perfect. So the cloud, right? In terms of consoles, I kind of want to just ground you. I guess we'll start with Office 365, and this webinar is not about Office 365 today, but a lot of people feel grounded, right, in seeing, okay, yeah, that's a web-based console, and it manages cloud things, and sure enough, right, there's an Office 365 console. It looks like this. Similarly, you could click on the admin button, and you'd be getting an admin console where you're managing the people and active users in your Office 365 and so forth. Additionally, you may have noticed a compliance portal. The compliance portal looks like this, right? And this is where you're managing the governance and e-discovery and data loss prevention and a lot of the things that we've chatted with you about on previous webinars and things we're very comfortable with. But it's a fully baked pizza, if you will, which is Office 365. Great. What we're here with you about today is more about Azure. And let's show you the Azure console. So a lot of these you may have noticed this was portal.office.com. Azure is portal.azure.com. Okay, so quite simply as an address, and assuming you have an Azure account, you would log in and you would have a portal available to you. There's licensing behind this portal. So I in particular am as a managing that, I'm part of Contoso, but I have a subscription to me, assigned to me. That's where I get my licensing from. That's what authorizes me to run anything within here. That could be assigned to your EA if you purchase through EAs. It could be something that's called a pay-as-you-go model, which is just pretty much hooked up to your credit card. It could be sold to you by a reseller such as ourselves, where we actually monitor your usage and help you get discounts effectively from pay-as-you-go model. And effectively, that subscription behind authorizes you to, we're going to call these affectionately the ingredients, right? And there's a whole kitchen full of ingredients that are available here at your disposal. For example, on the left-hand side, as we kind of navigate some of these things, here are virtual machines. Okay, these are machines that basically just think of as servers. Okay, you have the capability to spin them up. I don't believe I have any created here, but I certainly could create a virtual machine and move through that process, and we'll kind of demo some of that later. Additionally, I might have some storage. Okay, and here's the, if you need petabytes of storage, they're available to you right now. They're immediately available. Everything in this console is immediately available. SQL databases. Active Directory. Okay, this is where you manage your Active Directory or your Azure Active Directory, which is a component, another ingredient in the kitchen. Other elements might include VPN or load balancing or other networking to connect out to this environment. So we'll kind of do a deep dive, but I kind of want to just make sure that you are aware that there's a lot of ingredients in this kitchen, and this is the Azure portal. Again, we're going to come back to this. I also want to get you oriented to something called the pricing calculator. Pricing calculator is web available. Just type in your favorite search engine, Azure pricing calculator, and you're going to come to this page. And if you look down below, you'll see that right now it's blank. Okay, there's no estimate. But we're going to be adding some elements in here as we kind of walk through some of the some scenarios. We're going to bake some ingredients, right? And we're going to bake a pizza, and we're going to figure out what pizzas are popular to bake. And so with that, Adam, I think they've seen the Azure console and the pricing calculator. Again, we'll go into both in a little bit more detail, but I think I've got them oriented.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to bring back our deck here. And I think just one more orientation piece we had here, Bruce, was again, it's a big space. There's lots of things there. Doing our best to kind of compartmentalize. Microsoft releases kind of poster designs like these every few months, but they are adding things all the time. So this does change quite often. But I do think this table is helpful in that it kind of breaks down these services into kind of their logical functions. So developer services, if you have a development staff or development shop, those are the ones that are primarily going to be used by that team. Management and security layer kind of traverses all of Azure, for managing that environment and tracking some of the security elements of it. Compute, of course, is a lot of our infrastructure as a service components. Web and mobile is more of our platform as a service stuff. Data and storage is our storage area. So there's this kind of breakdown can be helpful, at least in digesting what's out there in Azure.
And it also can. I think it's also helpful just to know that there's a lot of stuff out there, and it's almost impossible for anyone. Adam and myself probably on this page probably recognize 50% of this page, and or have experience in customers using 30 to 50% of this page. But by no means does any organization or any individual have cardinal knowledge over all of these aspects and how to bake the ingredients just right. It's very much like a chef approach, and some of the areas that we're going to see are just extensions of things we've been doing for years, right? Virtual machines and networking, and they're just an extension of what we've already been doing. So helpful to see this grid. It absolutely does change. In fact, Adam, I meant to tell you, Microsoft announced this morning a service that was in preview that now went live as of this morning. Is something called the Front Door. I think it goes under a web protection, so it would probably be under identity and access management, it's under web and mobile. But it's just another service. So behind these categorizations here, there's probably 80 more services, and this is even just to kind of let you know it can get overwhelming, and our goal today is to keep it simple.
Yeah, well, look at that. This presentation is about 5 hours old, and it's already out of date. So.
Exactly.
Okay, Bruce, I think we also wanted to talk through just kind of framing out what our next few slides are going to be on walking through kind of the more popular scenarios, is starting with the environment. So if you want to take control, I think let's talk about what an environment might look like today, and this is going to be kind of our sample going forward through the rest of the presentation.
Perfect. Yeah, I thought we'd just start with what we know, right? So let's all get grounded in the fact that, we all probably have a network, right? And that network has some switch infrastructure on it, and we're basically chartered to connect things to it. So, just building out more infrastructure, we might have some wireless in our environment. And if you don't have some of these pieces, we're just trying to get a representative environment here. You connected to the internet, presumably through a router and some service, be it Comcast or AT&T or others. Hopefully, by any means, you have a firewall doing some of the protection to keep the traffic separated from your internal network from the external network. So all relative normal components. Likely, if you're like any organization, you have an Active Directory that stood up. If you're really small, you might get away without one, but I would say 95% plus of the organizations we're dealing with have an Active Directory. Stick a couple file servers in there, maybe a file server, an app server, and a SQL server, just to kind of be representative of what we likely have. Clearly, we'd have laptops and desktops that are probably part of that domain and joined to that Active Directory, serving as the end computing devices for our customers. I think there's been a long trend towards mobile devices. Obviously, additionally, there's mobile devices that are out in the field that aren't domain joined, but might be managed through some MDM or other software. Certainly, they're becoming on the fringe of our network. We back all this stuff up with some kind of sort of backup system. It could be on-prem, could be cloud, could be both. But I thought I'd throw that in there as we'll have some discussions about that. Cloud may or may not be part of your environment today. You may be leveraging a portion of it. Maybe your mail goes through there and gets filtered before it comes on-prem, or maybe all of your mail's out there already in Office 365, but cloud may or may not be part of it. And just like any technology, right? After you build all the technology, obviously we're doing this for the purpose of our employees. So I think we one time had a joke saying that we could design a great network if it wasn't for these darn users, right? But that's engineer mentality, and I think employees are who we're here to serve, and this technology ultimately at the end of the day is for them. So that's our kind of representative environment today. Pick the pieces you'd like or that you do or don't have, but that world, we're going to kind of try to extend that world and talk about what scenarios are relevant for the cloud. So, Adam, you want to walk through our most popular pies?
Sorry, I'm just talking to my mute button. So yes, let's talk through some of the most popular scenarios that we're seeing. First one is going to be build or buy, and again, I'll talk through these each on the next couple of slides, and then Bruce is going to whiteboard these out and kind of get a conversation going around it. Recovery and protection. And then branch, office, and remote workers. So all these elements are these kind of three categories is where we're seeing the most uptick in Azure usage. So let's go ahead and talk about what I mean by build or buy. So we're seeing two kind of flavors of this, but it revolves around a similar thing. It's time for you to upgrade infrastructure, server. Maybe there's a new version of your line of business application and you're going to need a beefier server. Maybe your server is just running 2008 R2 and it's end of life in January and you need a plan to get off of that. And in order to do that, you might need some more server hardware. So regardless, you reach a point where you know that you're going to need to invest in a new server solution. And at this point, you have the opportunity to, say, build it or buy it. And so what we mean by that, if we look at buy on the right-hand side here, you have the option of kind of doing what you're still doing, which is going out and speccing out a piece of hardware. You're going to spec out a server that will meet the requirements of this line of business application, and you're probably going to overspec because you have to account for scalability. So you're going to have some resources that you're going to be acquiring, whether it's storage or whether it's CPU cycles or whatever it may be, that you likely won't be leveraging for a while. Like I said, you're trying to build this out for scale. So you can go and make this capital expense. And then you have the same kind of thing that you've reached the end of now with the existing equipment, which is the lifecycle management. So it's a physical piece of hardware. Some things will fail. Hard drives will certainly fail. So you're managing that. You're paying for your support on that from HP and making sure you get hard drive shipped out when things do fail and all of that good stuff. But you are responsible, of course, for the lifecycle of that server. Alternatively, you could look at this opportunity to explore Azure as a potential location for that workload. We're talking about first workload type thing, so maybe it's a single line of business application, and you can spec out a server up there, and we saw how Bruce had done that in the pricing calculator. So you can spec that out, then you're really focused on building that server and focused on the application on it and the data, but you're not responsible for those physical elements and the capital expense that would come with all of that. So again, that's the build or buy model. There's an extension of this where right now I've spoken about an application upgrade or a single server upgrade. There are customers going all in on the cloud, which is absolutely possible, and Bruce will whiteboard it. But same concept. You're due for a hardware refresh. And let's look to the cloud to get out of the lifecycle management and hardware ownership game. So with that, Bruce, I'm going to advance our slide here, and I think you have some whiteboarding to share.
Sorry for this, folks, but out comes the crayon, right? So we've got our environment that had been drawn earlier, and again, hopefully is somewhat representative of your environment. But taking Adam's example of the line of business application, that let's just say you want to leave everything you have currently in place, but you're investigating a new line of business application. So you kind of need to build a new pizza. And let me make sure that my crayon's working effectively here. Nope, I've got to go to this. Go there. Okay. Let's go back a page. All right. So we're going to build a new pizza with this line of business app. And I'll put it in a circle for now, as it kind of looks like a pizza. But we're going to put a server out there, and this is going to be an app server. Okay. In addition to the app server, and maybe this app server, the specifications for from the vendor call for it to be maybe one processor and 8 gig of RAM or something like that. That's a bad 8, but will suffice. Okay. Additionally, we're going to need a SQL server. Okay, so we'll put a little database up there, and that requires 2 processors and 16 gig of RAM. And obviously, we're going to want to extend our Active Directory, right? This is we're going to need to authenticate and have permissions, users up here. So our Active Directory that we have on-prem is going to be, copy, if you will, of that. Now, in order for them to chat, as command controllers need to chat, they need a network in between them. So we're going to need to connect to our firewall, and we're going to have what Microsoft labels as a VPN. Okay. And again, these are the ingredients so far. So far, we've got 1 app server, 1 SQL server, 1 Active Directory server, 1 VPN. Now, it's cases like this. Oh, additionally, these servers are interconnected through something called a VNet. Okay. Now, VNet is free. It's still a component, but it's a absolutely necessary component for app, SQL, and AD to have communication capabilities between themselves. VPN is relatively low cost, and we'll take a look at that. They charge you for data that you take out of Azure, meaning if your users over here are consuming a lot of data from your app and SQL, you're going to start seeing some usage there, but in general, that's pennies as opposed to dollars, even in terms of usage. Now, some things I would ask you relative to your design here is, what do you want to do about antivirus for these servers? Okay, just like you would normally ask if you were spinning up a server, what are you going to do? Well, you might say, you know what, I'm just going to stick with my traditional tried and true antivirus and put that on the servers out here. Okay, that's perfectly fine. You can just add and install an agent for antivirus on there. I'd ask you something similar for backup. Okay, you have an on-prem backup system. What are you going to do for backup of this cloud environment? Is your internet pipe sufficient to download the app, SQL, and AD data to your on-prem system through the VPN? If so, great. Another thing I'm going to ask you about is licensing. How did you want to license that app, SQL, and AD server? Do you already own some licenses? Maybe you have some spare licenses that are sitting around, or maybe your EA affords you the capability to purchase licenses inexpensively, or did you want to apply licensing through the cloud model? And we'll talk through what that means too. And the last question I'd ask is, do you need remote access into this environment now? Right now, the only people that have access to this world you've built are the people that are on-prem. So someone sitting here at home, okay, sitting on a laptop, is connecting in to your network first and then riding that out to the cloud. Maybe your future is, phase 1, all I want is a kind of a testing world here, and I want to go through that. But down the road in phase 2, I'd like to connect directly to here from remote. And if that's the case, then we're going to want to have this pizza. It's going to need things like a firewall, right? So a future component might include a firewall. A future environment might include additional protections that might be afforded when going to a remote scenario. You might even include desktops in this environment. Let's say there's a significant amount of data in here. You might actually start putting desktops up here, running something called desktop as a service. Kind of like we had SaaS. DAAS is now becoming a common term where you're literally just running a remote terminal or a remote desktop, sort of like a VDI, to run against that data that's up there. So this is an example of what a line of business application looks like, and I thought it would be worthwhile for us to remember these components: the app, SQL, AD, and the VPN. And let's go over to the pricing calculator. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll just kind of walk through what the scenario would look like in the pricing calculator. So hopefully now that you're acclimated a little bit to this, here's what you do we've kind of done the design, if you will, very lightweight design, and now we're going to get into actually pricing. So I had 3 virtual machines, so I'm going to click the virtual machines button 3 times. Again, The goal is not to have you necessarily doing this in the future, but we'll click that 3 times. And down below, it's added several virtual machines. Okay, but virtual machines wasn't all we had. We also had some networking, and we had a VPN gateway that connected us there. So that was added down below. And, for now, we'll call that it. So let's walk through the 3 servers that we added down below. Where do we want to run these virtual servers? Well, let's run them out of the Western United States. Sure, sounds good. Are they going to be running Windows? Yes. And how much compute do they need? And if you'll recall from our design, you have a lot of choices as to how much compute you might need. But let's say in this particular case, our app server is going to be an A1, or an A2 rather. App server is an A2. And you can see here we're paying on bill as you go, which is the most expensive level of modeling. So if you get into a quoting scenario, absolutely involve Peters and Associates, and we can sell this to you at more of a discount. You can see you'll be running that one server for all 730 hours that are included in the month. Obviously, you do get price breaks if you're able to shut this server down and have processes for that, but let's assume you don't. We're not going to have any managed disks with this. It's just simply an app server. Our second machine, again, running out of the West, Windows, operating system. This one we'll leave as is. This is going to be our SQL server with 2 CPUs and 8 gig of RAM. We're going to run it for the month. However, this one I'm going to attach some disks to. In fact, I'm going to attach 4 disks, and we'll make it also with fast disks, if you will. Fast, relatively sizable disks attached to there. Now, we also have the option, if you're bringing your own SQL licensing and you already own SQL, great. You also have the capability, if you'd like, to use your SQL licensing integrated into the server. Now, it does increase the cost. If you may have noticed, this was a $300 server that we're running on a per month basis, and if you put SQL licensing on there, it's going to jump the cost quite a bit, just based on processing capability, because that server can handle a fair amount. But just know that that's an option, obviously, depending on where you want to get your licensing from. That was one of the design questions up front. And last but not least was our domain controller. We're just going to quickly assign that an S1 or an A1 rather, needing very little compute power. Great. So we've got our 3 servers that are priced up there. And last but not least is we have our VPN gateway. We want the VPN to actually attach to the West where we were running things. And you have some other choices in here. I won't dive into the minutia of this stuff now, but know that VPN gateways are generally not too expensive. Let's say that VPN is going to be up all month, and we're going to be running it. And you also have capabilities to look at how much data you might have running across there. And let's just say we transfer a lot of data, like 20 gig, and it's still only 70 cents for the month. So our total bill for running that environment for a month is $522. Again, that's the highest price you'd pay in that case. This is an estimate, keep in mind. All the billing is done on a per minute basis as to what services are on and running. If you used more disk, it's okay, right? This is just meant to get you an estimate. Furthermore, if we were to provide you a quote, there are certainly discounts that can be had either through purchasing through an organization such as Peters, or there are other choices to have discounts, such as bringing your own licensing, which is the Azure hybrid benefit, which can be turned on or off on a per server basis. And also, if you're able to commit to a longer period of time, rather than, hey, I'd like to rent this, if you're willing to commit to 1 or 3 years of running that and paying it as part of the cycle, then the cost can be reduced pretty greatly. So just kind of wanted to walk you through a scenario. Obviously, this something like this quote could be then exported, and you could then have a spreadsheet that shows you, what the costs might be expected to be. There's your, this was your app server. APP. This was your SQL server, which was the most expensive, and this was your AD server, and that's your VPN, for a total of $522. Okay, so that's really what design and now estimating and budgeting might look like for you as an organization. And last but not least is build. Okay, and we're not going to build out the whole environment, but let me just show you in the Azure portal. We had a few things that we were looking at. Right? We were looking at 3 virtual machines. So we'd come over here to the virtual machines. We'd be creating 3 new virtual machines, 1 app server, 1 SQL server, and 1 Active Directory. We'd also be creating a virtual network and a VPN gateway, effectively, as well as the VNet, which connected all of these servers in the environment. So just kind of wanted to dance through a few of the items to kind of show you what the build would look like. Let's return back to the PowerPoint just to kind of show how that could very easily be converted to an all-in scenario. Adam, this might come up as you presenting, and I certainly can take over. No, it looks like it's still me. So, what's left on-prem, right? If I look over here, I've still got an app server or a file server right here. Go back a page, get the crayon reset up. Okay. All right. And as we can see right here, we still have a file server, and we might still have, still have some domain controllers on-prem. So it's not much of a stretch. We still have some backup up there. So the move from line of business is certainly a start. But if you were to add up, add a file server up into here, add in some backup services. Again, these are just additional ingredients. And then suddenly what you might be left with on-prem is, a switch, a router, internet connectivity, maybe some workstations, maybe your wireless, right? So you can really lighten your load to put more and more resources out in the cloud at the pace that you want to go to. We've had a number of customers that have said, you know what, between Office 365, after I've gone there, the only thing left is a file server and maybe a SQL app. What can I do with that stuff? And rather than buying additional hardware potentially to house that, or worrying about keeping their closet properly ventilated, or electricity problems, they've decided to shift those things out into Azure. So really, line of business kind of just keeps moving into additional servers being put up here for that purpose. Okay, so that's kind of scenario number 1. Adam, do you want to walk through scenario number 2 here on recovery and protection as current state, and then maybe I'll do a little more pencil drawing on how to kind of leverage that.
Sure. I just took over as presenter. Okay. So Bruce already actually mentioned a little bit on the backup side of things, but again, we've got this environment, the current environment that's on-prem. Let's assume that we're not talking, first workload moving to Azure as a primary data center or the all-in strategy. We've still got to figure out a backup strategy for what you have on-prem. You likely have something in place today. You should, but our backup options vary. Maybe you're just doing a local backup. Maybe you're backing up to a local hard drive or to hard drives and taking those offsite yourself. Maybe you have a service that's taking tapes to a storage vault, but you have some local options. Alternatively, maybe if you have other sites especially, maybe you're backing up to another branch office that's across the country, and you're leveraging some of the investment that you already have in infrastructure at those branch offices, and we'll talk about branch offices a little bit more in just a moment. But maybe that's how you're doing it. You have another branch office. Or finally is the cloud option, which is something that a lot of our customers are leveraging, whether through Microsoft's native tools or even as just a storage location and pointing the backup solution to that storage location, which is a model that we've started to use more frequently here in the last couple of months. So, of course, cloud offers the advantage of keeping it in a data center that is far away from your primary data center, and you also don't have the investment of, say, maintaining a separate data center elsewhere. Of course, if you already have reason to have a data center elsewhere, then maybe that's not as strong of an argument for you. But for a lot of organizations, there isn't that reason anymore. And the cloud presents a nice option for pointing backup data to there. And Bruce, with that, I'm going to advance the slide here. And once again, if you want to do your drawing thing, it's all yours.
This one's a quick crayon, I think, because the concepts are such that I think it's relatively easy to understand. I think what we've seen, I'll call this scenario number 3, right? We've got the line of business app, we've got the all-in scenario, and now we've got just kind of a simple backup scenario. Your backup, quite simply, which is the on-prem, maybe backing items up, can be integrated to kind of move those items off into a cloud, right? And that backup, it's obviously depending on what types of backup software you're leveraging, but popular ones that we've been leveraging with our customers are things like Veeam, Backup Exec. Microsoft has their own backup software called Azure Backup. All of these product names have capability to move workloads from on-prem into an Azure-based cloud. Okay, so obviously the one of the advantages and why people want to take advantage that Adam was referring to is maybe not having a secondary data center, but I think another advantage is just from a cost perspective. The disk on-prem, we typically spec out, if you looked at like SAN storage or even NAS storage, you're usually in the $2 to $4 per gig ballpark. Azure storage is typically 2 to 4 cents per gig. So you're looking on the order of magnitude of 100 times less expensive to store things in Azure. And what that means is retention of data. You might be making decisions about how long you want to retain data based on price, or maybe you've already made decisions and it's costing you a fortune to maintain several years of backup types, backup storage. And so Azure and through your software can be a monumental capability there. In addition to backup, though, I do want to point out additional services that are available that are another extension, if you will, of Azure and another ingredient making up the pie. You've got capabilities on a per server basis. Let's say that file server is important to you, and in the event that that site was no longer available, and we've had customers with this happen recently, it would be wonderful if that server was also available up here. Okay? Kind of running like that. But I don't want to use it now, but in the event of a disaster, I want it available. And in fact, I'd love it to be up to date. So imagine having an up-to-date copy of your server up in the cloud, just sitting there waiting in case your site has a bad day. Okay? This site goes away, then let's say all 3 of your servers that you had were all replicated up there. Okay? What's that worth to you? Right? Well, a lot of people have invested in their DR plans, and to Adam's point earlier, if you have a second site, maybe you've got SAN storage and a second VM host and all of those things available to you. And that environment costs a fair amount of money to maintain, right? So I think one of the promises of Azure, and one of the reasons our customers have been looking at this, is on a per workload basis, you can get that information out of your data center into another region, and you can do so in a relatively inexpensive model. I'll go back to the pricing calculator and kind of show you what that looks like, but in general, we're looking at approximately $25 per server per month for items to be moved out into the cloud. Okay? So relatively inexpensive on the order of not a significant operational expense.
Well, and of course, Bruce, with Veeam being a different model as well, right?
Correct.
We're just focused on the storage.
Yeah, exactly. We have different tools that we've been leveraging for this. Veeam's got a great model for kind of integrating and not even having a separate process where virtual workloads are also taken in a stateful way and moved into this environment. So a couple different ways to do it, but at a high level, I think that's probably a decent overview of where those items go. Another scenario, just kind of based on timing, is our branch office and remote worker. Adam, do you want to walk through this, or you want me to?
Oh, I can talk through this.
Okay.
So let me do a quick build on this slide as I take over as presenter. So the other area where we're seeing Azure be impactful for organizations is those that have branch offices or remote workers, and that's starting to be most organizations, at least on the remote worker side of things. Today, how are employees accessing the resources that they need in this environment? Maybe they're VPNing in. Maybe you have a Citrix environment that they're going to VPN to and then connect to that. Maybe you have cloud applications like Office 365. Are they authenticating back to on-prem, or are they authenticating directly against the cloud? It's all dependent on your own situation. But the fact is, we are seeing organizations help to either eliminate branch office servers by putting some resources out in the cloud and allowing them to kind of still access centrally. And then from a remote worker perspective, Bruce is going to talk through a lot of these elements, but you've probably heard us talk through them before as they fit a little bit under the Microsoft's EMS category. But how are your remote workers authenticating? How are you ensuring that those are secure connections? Are you doing multi-factor authentication? Is there conditional access on to make sure that the device is secure and that the user is who they say they are? So Azure has all of these tools built in that really do fit the profile of helping organizations to connect their remote workers in a more secure manner and manage those branch offices. And Bruce, I'll go ahead and advance the slide, and then it's all yours to whiteboard for us.
Cran away. So, as Adam mentioned, a great way, and probably the most common way that we're seeing customers take advantage of this, and we've certainly chatted about this before, but your on-prem AD is, and again, let me get into crayon mode here. Okay, there we go. Your on-prem AD is used extensively for three things. Okay, it provides you access into apps. Okay. It provides you access and permissions for your data. Okay, you get permission to your G drive and H drive and all those applications accordingly. And third and final is your PCs are part of that and are kind of managed through Active Directory. So all three of these things are providing that capability today through your Active Directory. Well, what are you doing out in the cloud to embrace things like Office 365, right, and that cloud? And what are you doing including the data that's in there, such as the SharePoint data or the OneDrive data or the Exchange data? All of that data is being managed through something called Azure AD. Okay? And just like it sounds, you're actually running your first Azure ingredient, if you will. This is likely synchronized, right, and is a reflection of your on-prem Active Directory, and it's providing you access to applications such as Office 365, data such as SharePoint, Exchange, and OneDrive. And did you know it also can provide single sign-on into other apps? Concur, Box, Salesforce, and 3,500 other applications. Okay, so this capability is providing you single sign-on into Office 365 and can provide you single sign-on capabilities into other applications. A lot of our organizations are taking advantage of that. Additionally, and all of this is what I'll call the basic capability. And you get this kind of out of box if you have Office 365 to take advantage of Azure AD. Enhanced capabilities might include things like MFA, right? The ability to have your phone generate a code or to get a text message to validate your authentication onto any of those services. Additionally, there's capabilities to do self-service password resets. Self-service resets, and those are capabilities are the ability to just change passwords in an easy way, or if forgot my password and have it do some challenge questions and so forth. Other things are things like your FICO score. I always call it the FICO score, but it's basically to validate that your real-time identity has not had any issues with it, that you haven't been found out on the dark web and otherwise. And these essentially are advanced functions. So again, basic pricing and advanced functions, but Azure AD is absolutely one of those ingredients that customers are starting to take advantage of. Last but not least, kind of in the interest of timing, I think I'm going to go back. Actually, Adam, was there one more empty screen? I guess not. What we'll do is I wanted to chat one last service, and that is the file service. This file service, there's two things that are happening
Bruce,
today.
I think if you go to slide 14, I think that one is empty.
Gotcha. I might have advanced
too far.
I think
you advanced one more, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So this file service, here's what people are taking advantage of, and this is kind of our fifth scenario. A lot of organizations have started to take advantage of OneDrive. So what's happening is you've got a user over here who's got a G drive and an H drive, and those are, might not be the exact letters that you're leveraging, but their home directory is stored on the file server, and their G drive is stored on the file server. Okay, and some users have certainly taken advantage of OneDrive, and these users now have their home directory up here in OneDrive, which is an Office 365 service. And what that means is their H drive effectively is pointed to here, and it's synchronized to their local laptop. So they've got all the files stored up in OneDrive, and there's a synchronization process between the two so that they get to see all of their latest files. There's a number of advantages to this, such as the ability to share files more easily, to use to put it under governance and control, meaning data loss prevention, to have recovery capabilities. So a number of advantages to OneDrive. But still, that pesky G drive was still pointed to on-prem servers. What organizations are starting to do, and one of the services we're starting to see traction on, is to actually have a sync service between Azure called Azure File Sync. And Azure File Sync is effectively, think of it as a kind of an IaaS solution where you've got a server running up there, it's got some compute, and it's got some storage attached to it. And that storage, that as a unit, can actually look as a repository amongst all your file servers, and it actually does a sync to things like your G drive. And this could also include maybe more file servers that you have at multiple facilities. And all of these could be synced to one database. So the master copy is actually up in the cloud, but you have locally present synced versions on your local servers. So it basically looks like nothing to the end user. However, from an IT perspective, you get the clear advantages that all of your data is actually duplicated in two locations, readily available should your site have an issue. And last but not least, all of your data is in one location, so that you get some advantages from a backup, governance, and possibly even a long-term shift to all cloud-based, to an all cloud-based scenario, if bandwidth affords you that opportunity. So, kind of our 5 scenarios in recap were line of business application that you, instead of buying, you prefer to build. That can move to all-in scenario. We've got our backup and disaster recovery. And then under our remote workers, we've got 2 scenarios, taking advantage of Azure AD to extend the capabilities of Active Directory on-prem out into cloud-based applications. And then our 5th scenario here is file serving and making sure things are served well there. So with that, how do you get started? We believe strongly that if there's confusion as to what to do next, and where do I begin, we believe it's smart to have a cloud strategy conversation. The cloud strategy conversation is something where it's free. It's usually with a resource like Adam or myself, and we're simply talking about your environment. We're discussing what might be a logical next step. Are you in Office 365? What's your licensing model? Where do you want to be? How old is your hardware? Things of that nature. If we get into the situation where you're not necessarily confused, but you're still wondering, what might this all cost, or kind of starting to get your ducks in a row, you might be more tuned to a cloud assessment. And a cloud assessment's where, technical folks are going to get involved to run some tools, analyze your environment, evaluate what workloads not only might be best fit, but also what they might cost, and provide a report that ultimately you can provide as kind of a blueprint for your move. And if you're beyond that, and certainly there's some cost to cloud assessment, they're usually, haven't seen one be above $7,500 or a week's of work, but it kind of depends obviously on environments there. And if you're ready to go, right, if you've got an immediate need, someone's approaching you about launching a new system, or you really want to get backup out to another facility, you haven't had a chance, you're ready to go, and it's really just time to put things to paper and start going. So we're prepared and are doing that with a number of customers today with workload design and build. So, Adam, I think that kind of gives it a wrap.
Yep, I think so. So what we're going to do here is close things out and then open the floor to questions. So thank you very much for joining today's webinar on Azure as a secondary data center. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either Bruce or myself or your Peters & Associates account manager, and we'd be happy to answer them.